Hello and good morning everyone today, and thank you for joining our webinar. So presenting the webinar today we have Max Heinemeyer from Darktrace, and he's going to be discussing the cyber threat landscape and the need for autonomous response. We also have Luke Kiernan, who is from Bytes, and he's going to briefly discuss the relationship between Darktrace and Bytes before we pass over to Max.
Hi everyone. So yeah, I'm Luke Kiernan. So I work for Bytes Software Services and I'm the Security Business Manager. So before I pass over to Max, I just wanted to talk through the value points we see from the Darktrace solutions in our customers today. So the ever-changing and sort of ever-expanding IT landscape, customers that we deal with are facing difficult challenges with their legacy and existing solutions. So we saw Darktrace as complementary technology to that and to your existing estate to not only strengthen it, but to provide that clear visibility, which kind of brings me on to my next point. Darktrace can provide 100% network visibility from users, devices, cloud environments if you're using Azure or AWS, any SaaS environments like Office 365, IoT, and any OT or SCADA environments if you're using or have critical infrastructure. Now, this is key to understand not only what is out in your environment, but more importantly, identifying any lateral movement. The last point is all around automation. The Darktrace was built from the ground up using artificial intelligence and machine learning, which enables the platform to detect and respond to threats in real time. Max will be covering the need for autonomous response in today's landscape and will no doubt cover my two previous points throughout his presentation. So that was the value points we see and what we've seen from our customers. So without further ado, I'll pass you over to Max.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Luke and Amy. And welcome and good morning, everyone, from my side. My name is Max Heinemeyer. Very good pronunciation, Amy. And I'm the Director of Threat Hunting for Darktrace. You can think of me like the principal consultant. In the following presentation, I will present a few things. I will talk about just Darktrace for 1 or 2 minutes in case some of you might not have heard of us before, but it won't be a sales pitch, so don't worry. I'm also going into today's threat landscape, so what we see on the wire and what kind of attacks are predominant in most of our customers' environments. I'll give it a very short live demo. I think it's always nice to shake things up between the PowerPoint slides. And in the end, I've got a few threat stories with me from interesting findings we saw in our customers in the last 6 months. Now, maybe 1 or 2 words about myself. I've been with Darktrace for 3 years. Given that Darktrace has been around for 5 years in total, that makes me a veteran. And I'm part of the technical management team. I'm heading up a team of 30 threat hunters here in Cambridge in the UK. And as you probably can tell, I'm a native German. So I moved over from Germany to the UK just for Darktrace. Started working here 3 years ago. And I'm still using our product day to day if I'm not doing things like this webinar today or talking to our big strategic partners and clients and customers. So I'm still in the cyber trenches and very much hands-on. And every time there's a big ransomware attack like WannaCry, but it's live and happening and nobody's knowing it's WannaCry yet, because that name has just been given a week later, it's me and my team in the trenches and investigating, helping customers. Or if there's any quote-unquote APT, advanced persistent threat attacks happening, it's often me and my team who go into the fray and investigate and help customers use Darktrace to its best abilities. In my previous life, I was a penetration testing red team lead for Hewlett Packard, and all things offensive cyber are at my heart. But let's dive into what we want to talk about, and that's just 1 or 2 minutes about Darktrace in case you've not heard of us before. So Darktrace is a UK-based company. We've been around for 5 years, but we're one of the fastest UK-based tech companies, and we've been named one of the world's most innovative companies this year, next to companies like Netflix, Tesla, SpaceX, and Apple. And our current evaluation is $1.65 billion. So for a company in the cybersecurity space who's just been around for 5 years, that's a tremendous success. And we've got dual headquarters here in the UK and in San Francisco, but we've got offices all around the globe and customers all around the globe. And Darktrace does really come together, if you think back 5 years, from 3 different organizations. One is the cybersecurity experts from ex-government and intelligence services like GCHQ here in the UK and MI5. And these ex-spooks saw that there's problems. We just can't catch the advanced attackers and advanced malware with existing solutions like CM solutions, where you always have to define your use cases and you have to predefine what that looks like. And certainly legacy-based systems, just like firewalls and antivirus solutions, don't work because you always have to rely on the signatures and rules and have to predefine what tomorrow's attack is going to look like. And that A, doesn't scale, and B, just doesn't work for tomorrow's attacks. So these guys who knew the problem and had the cyber expertise went to the University of Cambridge in the UK, world leading in machine learning and narrow artificial intelligence, and sat together and created Darktrace. A third organization coming on top is investors who helped us grow sales force and marketing teams. So Darktrace really has gone through the roof. We've got customers everywhere in every industry vertical. There's the obligatory slide about some of our customers from small and medium enterprises all the way to global banks. So some of our smallest customers are family-owned bakery chains, and others are small hedge funds, 15 employees, but millions of dollars of revenue. And we scale all the way up to huge companies like HSBC, various other banks, insurance companies. Drax Power Station is one of our first clients and still is on board after 5 years now. So we're not tied down to a single industry vertical. I will introduce what we do at Darktrace after I talk about the threat landscape, but I just want to give you a brief idea of where we are and our growth in the market for now. So this is who we are, but let's zoom out a bit and take a look at the threat landscape. Now, since we have thousands of customers and we have a team that also runs some services for some of our customers, although we are a software company, we do run some services for some customers, we get very good telemetry. And this telemetry helps us to understand the current threat landscape. The first big trend, I have 3 big trends for you today, which I think will resonate with most of you quite well. The first big trend we've been seeing in the last 12 months is what you probably can recognize from these screens here, ransomware. I mean, this is an oldie but goodie, I want to say, and everybody's aware of ransomware, so malware that locks your computers and demands a ransom. And it has declined in popularity a bit in the last half year, but it's still very prevalent out there. And I'm mentioning it because it's so destructive. The big kickoff, the big genie that came out of the bottle and hasn't been put in since was WannaCry last year in May 2017, where we saw worming ransomware for the first time. Network worms have been around since the early 90s, and ransomware has been around since the early 2000s, but the combination of both, ransomware that can autonomously move through your network at machine speed, that's the first time we saw it in 2017 last year. And there's many, many different strains of ransomware. We saw WannaCry last year live in our customer environments and defended them against it. So not only did we help them clean up, but in some cases where our customers had autonomous response in place, we defended and stopped WannaCry dead in its tracks without knowing beforehand what WannaCry looks like. So we didn't need any signatures or rules. I will talk about how we did this in a little bit. Because we just work based on behavior. And you can imagine if a piece of ransomware hits your device and it starts scanning your whole internal network, it starts encrypting files left and right, it starts to scan the internet, that looks very, very anomalous compared to normal behavior in your environment. So Darktrace looks for anomalous behavior and anomalies. And some of the most clever, I might say, or sophisticated ransomwares we've seen, as in any market really, and I think about cybercrime or the cybercrime ecosystem like the perfect market because it's fully unregulated, right? You have different crime groups working together, they exchange malware, they exchange services, and there's no regulation on top. So in any unregulated, almost perfect market, there's a lot of innovation. So where ransomware started out last year with just generic worming ransomware moving around from computer to computer, these days we see more clever attacks like affiliate ransomware. I'm going to affect you, Luke, and if you infect 3 of your friends, I'm going to let you off the hook. So the bad guys come up with clever schemes to increase their monetization and make more money. And of course, nobody's recommended to do this and infect your friends, but there's loads of people who fall for this. Other cases are where ransomware becomes more industry specific, so targeted against certain verticals. For example, the entertainment and travel industry, the hotel industry, where some ransomware doesn't just log every computer it sees, but only the systems in hotels where you can distribute new key cards, so new keys for your hotel guests and their doors. And I've seen that live in action where customers have been locked out their hotel rooms because the system that is supposed to generate new card keys, is being ransomed and locked out. So what I'm saying is there's a lot of innovation going on in this sector. The second biggest, which had overtaken ransomware for a while this year, is cryptocurrency attacks. Now, I'm sure all of you are aware of the meteoric rise of Bitcoin and any other cryptocurrencies around a year ago, actually November, December last year. And what you're seeing there is a chart of Monero exchange course to US dollar. Now, Monero is an alternative cryptocurrency. Bitcoin is the best known, the most well known, but Monero is like the second most popular out there. Monero is super popular among cyber criminals because it uses commodity hardware like laptops and servers and workstations, even smartphones, and it can still mine profitable Monero cryptocurrency on there. Whereas if you try to mine a Bitcoin on your single laptop, you will never make a single cent because it's gotten so expensive to do it because of the algorithms behind it. But Monero works slightly differently and it's much more efficient. That's why we see a lot of cryptocurrency attacks these days. And one of my threat anecdotes at the end of this webinar is talking about a worming cryptocurrency attack that used Monero. So instead of using WannaCry or other ransomware to move around, it used various worming techniques to move around the network, use lateral movement, but it didn't use ransomware as a payload. It used cryptocurrency miners as a payload. And I will go into more details, but this is the second big trend we are seeing in customer environments. And the third big trend is more subtle, I'd say, and we call it supply chain attacks. So if you think about digital supply chains these days, and me being an ex-ethical hacker, I can very much underline this. This is a very well-known technique. Supply chain attacks leverage our complex IT ecosystems these days. So if you try to think about your organization and where you draw the line between your organization and other organizations, these days with the advent of cloud, bring your own device, contractors, suppliers, vendors, blurry network lines, it becomes very difficult actually to say this is the exact line where my network ends and this is where other network starts. So these days, adversaries and even malware try to hit your suppliers and vendors if you are too hard to target, because in general, I think it's fair to say that people and organizations become better at cybersecurity thanks to technology breakthroughs and just more awareness. If organizations become harder of a target, the attackers, the cyber criminals, just move to their suppliers and supply chains. Last year, there was a case of an infection of the prominent software CCleaner, which some of you might know. It's a freeware to speed up and clean up Microsoft computers. And for a short while, the official CCleaner download was infected and bundled with a piece of malware that was highly sophisticated and targeted. And it took roughly a month, for the company behind CCleaner to notice this and tell their customers and get a clean version out. We saw these CCleaner infections in some of our customer networks without ever knowing that CCleaner was the root cause. So we saw very weird connections coming out to rare IP addresses on the internet, beaconing traffic, so repeated connections to command and control servers without having any signatures for it. So if you think about supply chain attacks, there might be malicious insider inside these supply chains already. And I just want to give you one more example before I go into some things about Darktrace and a live demo later. But supply chain attacks could come from very trusted partners of yours. We had a case where a customer of ours, a pretty well-known IT company, said, okay, we want to test Darktrace. We want to see if you guys can catch our penetration tester, so our ethical hacker, and if you can tell us where he entered, what he did, how he moved around. So we said, no problem. We do this every day. This is our bread and butter business, basically. So they got a third party in. Our customer got a third party pen tester in. It wasn't in-house. They got a third party in. And the pen tester started to do his thing, and it was very obvious. He rang all the bells and whistles. We caught him in minute 2, because Darktrace does real-time detection. And we told the customer everything he did. The customer was very pleased. But the customer wasn't as pleased when our customer heard that the pen tester, while conducting the pen test, was establishing an SSH tunnel, so a very strong communication protocol, fully encrypted, to his home network, uploading 20 gigabytes of data during the pen test. So why do I call this a malicious insider in the supply chain? Well, first off, it was a third party of our customer, and our customer wasn't aware that their trusted third party, the pen tester, had established a tunnel to his home network and was uploading everything he did, every bit of his vulnerability scans, every bit he found, to his home network. And it's unclear if he wanted to use the data to do a report write-up later or just for malicious purposes to sell it on, but it was clearly a case of a supply chain attack. And if our customer hadn't had Darktrace in there, he would never have mentioned or noticed that. And we saw that because the pen tester had a new device. We had never seen that before. He was, of course, pen testing, so it was very obvious, all the scanning, all the lateral movement. But he was also beaconing out to a rare domain on the internet where nobody else in the customer environment ever went to, so it was highly unusual. And using SSH to go to the internet, not use it internally, was also highly anomalous. And uploading 20 gigabytes was, again, an anomaly in itself. And all these subtle anomalies taken together led Darktrace to say, hang on a minute, this is highly unusual, we need to investigate this. This looks like a proper cyber attack. So these are the top 3 trends we're seeing amongst our customer base: ransomware, cryptocurrency mining, and supply chain attacks. And I'm sure if you think about your environment, you will probably think about some weak links in your supply chain. Now, why is this so efficient? Why is ransomware so interesting, and why is cryptocurrency mining so interesting? And apologies for the big PowerPoint slide here, but if you don't want to read through it, you can just close your eyes for a minute and listen to my voice. If we think about traditional cybersecurity, cybercrime, how the bad guys try to monetize on their business models, it often works like this. They send around a piece of malware in phishing emails, in scam emails, and they've got a banking Trojan attached. So as soon as somebody clicks on the email link or downloads a PDF or Word document like an invoice and opens it up, they get infected by a banking Trojan. Now this banking Trojan sits there, captures your banking credentials, but how does the bad guy, how does the cyber criminal monetize on that? They've got your credit card details now, but surely they can't just go somewhere and get some money out of an ATM, because that would be very obvious. So what they do actually is they send the credit card details, either they send them or they sell them on to some third-party cyber criminal somewhere in a country that doesn't have a international cooperation treaty with your country. So they send it to a buddy of theirs in another country. This buddy takes the credit card details and buys some luxury goods, often on the black markets. And after they bought it, sell it on straight away. So they use the credit card details to buy some luxury goods, and they sell the luxury goods like perfume, expensive handbags, clothes, and they sell them again, so they got some cash. Now they take the cash and send it to a money mule, so a buddy of theirs, over some bank transfers. Now this money mule keeps a bit of the profit and sends the money on again to another money mule. And the second money mule keeps the profit again, a bit of it, but sends the rest on to money mule number 3. And that money mule sends it on to money mule number 4, and so on and so forth, until finally a bit of the profit comes back to the original malware author who created the malware and infected you in the first place. So it's a complex ecosystem, but I'm sure you can appreciate there's many steps involved, and mostly the bad guys are being caught via the money transfers. So law enforcement can trace back the money transfers and find the money mules or the original authors. Now fast forward to 2018, 2017, cybercrime, monetization in the age of cryptocurrencies. All that happens is I, as a cybercriminal, infect your machine via the same means, spear phishing or scam email, invoice.txt or something like that. You get infected. Now I've got a cryptocurrency miner sitting on your laptop. You don't even notice it. It just runs in the background and nicks a bit of your CPU power, and it sends the cryptocurrency being mined to an anonymous Bitcoin or Monero mining pool on the internet. And I, as a cyber criminal, can just use it there, take it out from my wallet, and exchange it into US dollar or pound or euro, whatever, in an anonymous transfer. So what we see here is that cryptocurrencies are really a game changer for the bad guys, because all the money trail has been eliminated, and it's much tougher now for law enforcement to catch the bad guys. That's why we see a big uptick in cybercrime in all varieties and flavors. Now, shifting away a bit from the cyber threat landscape, I want to talk a few minutes about what we do at Darktrace and how we catch the bad guys and all these scenarios I talked to you before. So I mentioned Darktrace came around by ex-intelligence people coming to artificial intelligence people and the University of Cambridge and creating a new solution. Now, what Darktrace actually does is we do network monitoring, we do security monitoring based on network traffic. And I apologize in advance if I lose some people here. I try to be not too techy, but it should still be very interesting, I hope. So we do security monitoring based on network traffic. Darktrace comes as a hardware appliance or a software appliance for cloud solutions. We can deploy in industrial control networks and SCADA networks. It really doesn't matter as long as we get access to a switch, a core switch, so we see north, south, and east-west traffic. So we're not a perimeter solution like a firewall. And Darktrace doesn't use any agents. We doesn't use any scanning like Nessus or Qualys. And we don't do log collection. So we're not a CM solution. We're not an ArcSight, a Curator, or a Splunk. We don't need any logs. All we need is a network port. So let's say we take Darktrace and plug it in somewhere in a core switch. Then Darktrace starts to see all that network traffic, right? We go down to layer 7, OC layer 7. So we do deep packet inspections. We do understand every bit of traffic. Now, once Darktrace starts to see the traffic, it starts to learn. And this is where the unsupervised machine learning and the narrow artificial intelligence comes in. Now, Darktrace starts to see all the traffic, it starts to see all the devices, and starts to learn what normal behavior constitutes for every single device, and it keeps evolving this understanding. So let's say Darktrace sees the laptop I'm presenting this presentation with. Darktrace will understand how often I use GoToWebinar, how often I go to Facebook, how often I go to darktrace.com, how often I use internal SMB traffic in my internal network, how often I use VPN, how often I use SMB version 1, version 2, how often I use Kerberos logins, how often Max as a user logs in if I log in on the weekends, what times I normally log in, what credentials I use, if I use HTTP or HTTPS, if I use HTTP post requests or GET requests. So I don't want to get too techy, but I just threw like 10 different dimensions or features, how we call them in machine learning at you. But Darktrace monitors over 400 features on a minute-to-minute basis for every single device it sees. And because we understand all network traffic in all devices and behavior, we can spot anomalies. So we don't use any rules or signatures to spot anomalies. And as soon as a major deviation occurs on any device, really, and this could be internal scanning, it could be data exfiltration, it could be command and control traffic, it could be the initial intrusion, the download of hacking tools. So it doesn't matter where on the kill chain we sit, we see it all. And as soon as it occurs, we're going to alert on it in real time and give you all the relevant details, all the network visibility that Luke mentioned initially to investigate. So I just continue now, and I talked through how Darktrace works, but I think to really drive it home and give you a flavor and an idea of how it looks like, I want to show you a quick live demonstration. And Amy, please feel free if you feel like there's too much latency or you lose my screen to interrupt again. That's super important because I don't have any visual feedback.
Yeah, so, sorry about that.
No, it's great. Thank you. So here we see the Darktrace interface, and it's very different from traditional solutions because most traditional solutions are not really meant to be used by anybody. If you think about level 1 SOC operators, it's very tough for most junior analysts to use most security solutions. I used to be a SIM consultant myself. I used to work with ArcSight, and I used to work in a SOC. And if you want to work with traditional cybersecurity solutions, if you're a firewall engineer or an ArcSight engineer, you know that you need a proper bachelor's degrees in IT or IT security and probably several years of experience to understand what these specialized solutions try to tell you. So we take a different approach. We want to make security as approachable to anybody as possible, so you can come to quick solutions and quick judgment calls. So that's why Darktrace looks a bit different, but it's very intuitive and very powerful. So the first thing we see in Darktrace is how many devices we are monitoring right here. So in this environment, we see 30,000 devices roughly in 2,000-ish subnets. And Darktrace tells you and knows how many of these devices are clients and how many are servers. Because, as I said initially, Darktrace learns and understands what each and every device is, just based on the network traffic. No agents, no scanning, no log collection. So deployment is very simple. Now, the interesting bit is, if you think back to traditional security solutions, you often have to go in there and tell your SIM solution or your firewalls, these are my workstations, these are my servers, these are my voice over IP telephones, these are my IoT devices. So you have to put your asset management and your CMDB into all your other solutions. Darktrace takes the other approach. It tells you, this device here is a laptop. This device here smells and looks and sounds like an IP telephone, so most likely it's an IP telephone. Here's some DNS servers, here's the rogue proxy. So Darktrace tells you all of that, and you can export it into your own CMDB if you want to. So again, Darktrace is very lightweight. You don't need to keep it tuning. You don't need to go in there and tell it, these are your core workstations or anything like that. It has an understanding of all of that because it sees all your network traffic and builds up this pattern of life for everything it sees. But this is really just a byproduct. What I want to do is talk you through one alert from the perspective of a cyber analyst, and I promise I won't lose you. I won't go into too many details, but I saw that we have at least a few cyber analysts on the call, so it should be fairly interesting for you guys. So let me zoom in a little bit to make reading easier. So at the moment, Darktrace tells us here at the bottom, there are several anomalies happening in this network, in these 30,000 device network, in the last 7 days. Now, these anomalies can range from very specific things like an SMB directory traversal attack to very generic things like just unusual activity, to something happened that looks very unusual and we have never seen that before. So let's take a look at this. There's 3 cases of this, and one of these cases has a comment in there. So if I click on this, as an analyst, I want to understand what's going on here. And we see there's the 3 cases we talked about. So 1, 2, 3, and we see they're timestamped, and we see what kind of devices are involved. If I want to know more about this one here, I get immediate visibility. So Luke mentioned this initially, 100% visibility, but I really want to drive this home. Because once you see something happen, you need to understand what's going on. You don't want to pivot around 20 different tools. You don't want to have to go into your Active Directory and look up the user. You want to see it all in one pane of glass. And that's what we try to do here, give you situational awareness. So we see immediately by hovering over the device what credentials are associated, what type of device it is, what MAC address we have there, what IP address, and so on and so forth. And Darktrace tells us this is 95% anomalous compared to its normal behavior. So let's try to understand what's going on here. If I zoom in, Darktrace puts me at the time of the incident and puts the device in question, this Linux server, in 3D in the middle here. And we see there's a live replay of the traffic of the incident going to the internet here, some traffic, but also some traffic going to a mail server on the right-hand side. Now there's some multicast traffic happening. There's a server on the right-hand side that had another anomaly, hence it's being highlighted in yellow. So we can see what's happening in real time at the time of the incident in 3D. But between you and me, this is super useful for some things like network scanning, visualizing lateral movement, or if BitTorrent is happening, because you see almost like a spider web connections all across the globe. But of course, it's not just about this 3D stuff. So this is nice for the first 5 to 6 seconds of an investigation. And after that, we want to drive into the nitty-gritty details, things like seeing what actually happened. And don't worry about where I'm clicking. I just want to give you the rough overview how deep you can go in Darktrace. So now I told Darktrace, tell me the exact connections that led to this investigation. So we see here in chronological order every connection that led to this incident. Now Darktrace tells us it is unusual and has been highlighted because of the external data transfer. So let's take a deeper look. At 10:10, first off, we saw an outgoing connection, this blue arrow, from Linux, which connected to 13.facebook.com, so it's natural language. You don't need to understand what Kerberos event 2357 means to understand this event. And you see it go to facebook.com over port 995, and it's colorized by destination port. Now, we try to use every bit of visual aid possible to make understanding what's happening easier for everybody involved. So now this is all interesting, but why would a Linux server connect to Facebook over this unusual port? Now the machine learning kicks in. The machine learning tells us, if I hover over this arrow, the machine learning tells us how rare facebook.com and its IP address and its host name is for this environment. Now it's important to understand, we see here facebook.com is 100% rare for this environment. That means nobody in this internal network ever goes to Facebook. Now this immediately makes this incident much more suspicious. Why would an internal server go to Facebook over a weird port, especially if Facebook is rare in this environment? Now, what is interesting here is Darktrace has learned that Facebook is rare for this environment purely based on this network we're observing here on this demo network. It's not based on other customers. There's no threat intelligence or machine learning being shared. And this is all done on premise. So all the learning and all the data stays on premise. Nothing is being sent to a magical Darktrace brain in the cloud or something like this. It all stays on premise. So there's no data sharing. We do offer services, but even there, everything stays on premise in your environment. We have a lot of customers in the industrial control system space, in the government space, in the defense sector, in the military space. Often there's no network connectivity and nothing can be sent out, so it all stays on premise. What's also important to understand, everything we see is learned based on your environment. So if we see, let's say you're a bank or you're a financial institute, everything we show you is based on your environment, not other banks, and no learning taken from other insurance companies, for example. So it's purely individually tailored to your environment. So Facebook maybe in your environment might be 0% rare. But let's continue with this incident for a minute. So we see 8 minutes later here in chronological order, the same internal device made an outgoing connection to l.dcoin.co over port 22, which in most cases is SSH. So let's see what happened here. By hovering over the device, again, we get more details, and we see dcoin.co is again 100% rare. I personally have no idea what this website is. And we see the application protocol being used, which is SSH. So we do look down on OC layer 7. We do depacket inspection. And if I wanted to, for any of these connections, I could tell Darktrace, grab a PCAP, get me a packet capture straight away. So Darktrace is not just about 3D visualization and showing you anomalies. It's also about pivoting around data, drilling into incidents quickly down to the PCAP level if you want to. And why is this interesting, this event? So let's recap. We see a Linux server go to Facebook, which is rare. Then we see the same server go to a rare website over port 22, so using SSH, which is normally restricted to the internal network. And then a few minutes later again, at 10:22, the same TCP connection is still ongoing, indicated by the flashing arrow. And in this small box here on the bottom right, you see 260 megabytes were uploaded. So the blue number means upload to the internet. So what we see here is a Linux server go to Facebook, then go to l.dcoin.co over port 22, and then upload 260 megabytes to a rare website. Now, what actually happened here is, and this has been a while ago, this is a Bitcoin mining pool. So an admin made an update, put an update into this Linux server, and it took a while, so he got bored, and he just went to Facebook, to a Facebook app, did something there, was hit by a drive-by download, and the server got subsequently infected by a Bitcoin miner, and it's starting mining Bitcoin hashes and sending it to this Bitcoin mining pool about port 22. Now, why is this interesting from a detection perspective? Because A, we didn't use any blacklists. We didn't say, look for l.dcoin.co, because this was not known, this website, before we found it here. Also, we did not say every time a server uploads more than 100 megabyte or 50 megabyte or 200 megabyte to a website on the internet. Because if you do this, if you look for this kind of data exfiltration or DLP mechanisms, you're going to have hundreds and hundreds of false positives. We also didn't say anytime there's an outgoing SSH connection to the internet from a server to any website on the internet, because then again, you have hundreds of false positives and you get burnout as an analyst, or you're going to lose your analyst quickly. On the contrary, all these subtle deviation changes led to a single incident. So because Darktrace knew internal servers normally don't go to Facebook, they normally don't use port 22 to go to the internet, certainly not to 100% rare external websites, and certainly not uploading this amount of data, Darktrace highlighted this. Now, we can even visualize this in 2D, and I don't want to bore you with more visualizations, but here we see, again, the Linux server, but now we visualize the external data transfer for this device, and the yellow dot here is the detection we just said, so the data exfiltration, and we see the blue lines are the data going out, the data amounts going out. So we see there's nothing before, there's nothing after it, but just at the time of the incident it happened. We could even go back 2 or 3 weeks and visualize this, and we would see nothing ever happened here, no exfiltration, no data sent to the internet. But all of a sudden, there's a big spike, and this is what Darktrace alerted on. There's no hard threshold. The detection was based on unusual amount of data going to the internet to a weird destination. Now, I think I've shown you how Darktrace works here, and I appreciate our timing here, and I want to leave some time for question and answers. But I want to quickly move on to 3 real case studies we've seen in the wild in the last year. And everything we talked about now so far was just Darktrace detecting things. But of course, besides detection, we can also stop things, because this webinar is also about autonomous response. And I will go into more details once I talk you through the 3 real-world case examples. So the first one I want to share is, again, a Bitcoin mining incident, but it has a very tangible physical aspect to it. So this was, all 3 I'm going to mention were during proof of values. So we're Darktrace, we believe we can talk all day, I can promise you all things every day, but obviously I'm biased because I work for Darktrace. So how we can best test it or get a flavor and an idea of how Darktrace works is by trialing it out. So we do free of cost proof of values with our partners or by ourselves. And these proof of values normally last a month, so 30 days. And we ship you a hardware appliance, which you plug into one of your core switches after a sizing call. And there's no installation required, there's no configuration required. It's literally plugging it in, and normally takes 1 hour or 1.5 hours. So you don't need to roll out an agent, you don't need to configure any log collections or tune Darktrace, you just plug it in. And after 5 to 7 business days, Darktrace shows you the first results for your environment. And we normally deliver 3 reports to you guys and tell you, okay, this is what we found in week 1 in your environment. This is what we found in week 2 in your environment. And look here in week 3, there's some data exfiltration. Here's a malicious insider, and there's a botnet active. So all of these cases I'm going to tell you about now in the next few minutes are from these proof of value periods. So when Darktrace just got deployed into an environment and just started learning the environment. So the important takeaway is the proof values are free, super easy to deploy. You get immediate value and visibility, and it doesn't need months and months of learning. You get results after 5 to 7 business days. So this was a case of a European bank where we highlighted a device conducting Bitcoin mining. Now, Bitcoin mining is super obvious and easy to spot. We saw this device sending data out, similar to the case I showed you just a few minutes ago, to the internet over weird ports, port 30,000, to IP addresses on the internet nobody ever used in this bank. Now, we told the customer and they said, hang on a second, we don't recognize the subnet which the device is located in, neither do we recognize the device. So we went on site and helped them track it down. We went into the data center to the switch where the subnet was supposed to be located, and we found a cable going off the switch, which they weren't aware of, and we took the physical cable and tracked it back, and it went under the floorboards in the data center, and we found a laptop being put under the floorboards that was just sitting there conducting Bitcoin mining operations. Now, it was from a malicious insider who thought, well, this is my employer, I don't have to pay for electricity here, so why not put in a laptop who's constantly Bitcoin mining in the data center? Well, obviously that's a very, very bad idea from many perspectives, but it shows you how tangible it can get. And the next one, again, has something to do with cryptocurrency mining, but it's also tied to the laterally moving machine speed attacks we see like WannaCry. So something we see quite a lot is some form of malware hitting customer environments, and within a minute or 2, they spread to every other device on the network. So even if you've got the best security team in the world, and you see straight away the initial infection, it might be too late because it has spread around everywhere. So in this case, we had 2 customers who got hit by the same spam wave. The first customer got hit, and we saw the initial infection, we saw the lateral movement, and we could help them investigate and clean up everything because we saw every bit of lateral movement. And it took us 1 hour to conduct a full report on every bit of infected device, every command and control domain out there, so they could start blocking things on their firewall and clean the devices up. But still, 200 devices got infected within 2 minutes because the malware hit so rapidly and moved around so quickly. So we had a perfect visibility, and the cleanup operation was very simple and easy for the customer, but still painful. Now, the second customer who got hit had our autonomous response solution, Anti-Gina, in place. It's called Anti-Gina. And the second customer who got hit by the same spam wave had an employee who clicked on the phishing link, and his device got infected initially, and the device tried to spread around, similar to the other customer, but Anti-Gina prevented that. Now, how does this happen? I didn't talk about Anti-Gina at all, our autonomous response, but it's something we see increasingly relevant in the age of worming malware and laterally moving attacks. Now, even if you have the best security team seeing these attacks like WannaCry or WannaMine, like this Monero mining malware, straight away it might be too late to act because it's happening so fast and so devastatingly. So what Anti-Gina does is it sees the same things that Darktrace sees. It's the same detections, but it can stop connections. It can block connections and interrupt connections. So what happens is when Antigena sees a big anomaly, which might look like ransomware or lateral movement, it can interfere. It can act very surgically. Now, some of you might think, oh, this sounds like yet another IPS, intrusion prevention system, but believe me, it is not. While, yes, we sit on the network, and while, yes, we do interrupt connections, Antigena does so cleverly. So instead of just going there and killing everything with fire and trying to block everything everywhere, Antigena is meant to buy your security team time to act and respond. So what Antigena does is, and this is the clever aspect really that makes it so non-interruptive to business operations, because this is why nobody has IPS systems running in live mode, because it stops business operations left and right. Antigena doesn't, because what it does is, as soon as it sees an attack happening on the wire, it will put the device that is infected or is the offender in a box of known good behavior. Now, it took me a while to wrap my head around this, but what does that mean? Well, Darktrace learns what normal behavior constitutes. It knows that my computer, Max Heinemeyer's computer, normally doesn't beacon out to Russian IP addresses on the internet. It knows that I normally don't scan the internal network. It knows that I normally don't use lateral movement techniques like PSExec or RDP to move around. So it knows what constitutes normal and good behavior for me and for my peer group. So as soon as the deviation hits and a potential infection hits, Antigena puts my device in this box, in this cardboard box almost, of known good behavior, where me as Max can still conduct his normal business operations. I can still go to my email server. I can still use Dropbox if I use it every day. I can still go to Facebook. I can still use the internal SMB shares I normally go to. But everything else, the lateral movement, the attempted encryption across the wire in case of ransomware, the command and control traffic going to weird places on the internet, the scanning, all of these things are out of the norm. So Antigena blocks all of that. But in most cases, the user doesn't even recognize that they are being antigena'd, that they're being blocked. So what I'm trying to say is, Antigena is very non-disruptive while buying your security teams time to catch up with these fast-moving, very devastating attacks like WannaCry or WannaMine. So needless to say, the second customer hit here in this example of WannaMine, of a laterally moving Monero infection, had a very easy time cleaning up because only one device got hit, the initial one, and the malware couldn't spread, couldn't communicate with command control traffic, and couldn't exfiltrate any data. Now, the last case I want to tell you about is something we saw in the cloud. Now, Darktrace can deploy in cloud environments, we can deploy in SCADA or ICS, industrial control system environments, or physically on-premise. It doesn't really matter. And all the data stays in your environment, so still nothing is sent back to Darktrace. What we saw here is a classic example of a malicious insider. So Darktrace had cloud visibility here. So we saw the customer cloud and their physical hardware. So what we saw was a malicious insider who, from his laptop, went into their internal cloud deployment and downloaded a big part of their customer database from their internal cloud deployment. So we see this laptop device go to their internal cloud server, download loads of data over SMB, and this device had never done this before. So Darktrace instantly said, this is unusual internal data transfer. This laptop normally doesn't go to this customer database, and he doesn't download this amount of data. And just a minute later, the same laptop started uploading the same amount of data he internally downloaded to Dropbox. Now, Dropbox is used all the time in this environment, so that didn't ring any bells. But the amount of data sent out and the correlation between the internal data transfer, customer database to laptop, and the external data transfer, laptop to Dropbox, was highly anomalous and highly unusual compared to its own behavior, so what the laptop normally does, compared to its peer group, other laptops in the environment, and compared to the overall network. And lo and behold, that employee handed in his notice a day later and wanted to leave the company, taking some sweet secrets with him. Now, I don't even know how you would identify and spot this with traditional DLP solutions or with traditional CM solutions. Of course, you can start building your use cases in a CM solution like ArcSight or Splunk. I'm not trying to derail these solutions. They're good for other things, but not so much for real-time threat detection, in my opinion. But I wouldn't even know how you can build a use case that is precise, that fires only when it should fire without a hard threshold, and not swamping your security team with hundreds of false positives every day. Now, my throat is getting very dry, and I've talked for quite a while now. and bombarded you with a lot of knowledge about Darktrace and Antigena and some real threat stories. So I would like to hand it over to the Q&A session. You can always find us via our good friends at Bytes. Just get in touch. We're also on Twitter at Darktrace or at ShellDemon, which is my private Twitter account if anybody wants to hit me up on any follow-up discussions. But I think we should open up for Q&A now. So Amy, if you can assist me here, that'd be great.
Brilliant. Thank you, Max. Okay, so as mentioned at the beginning of the webinar, if you do have any questions, there is just a questions box in the panel just to the right-hand side. If you write them in there, I will read those out shortly. Okay. Okay, so one question here, it says, what if an environment is already infected when Darktrace is deployed?
Oh, that's a great one. So I mentioned how we often deploy in the proof of value period into environments we have never seen before, and we start seeing interesting things after a few days. So of course we see pre-infected environments all the time. Darktrace comes in and there's an infection going on already. Now, while we still spot this without a problem, because even if one device or a few devices are infected, the whole peer group of devices, so all these similar laptops or servers, look quite different to the single infected device. And the overall network also still looks different to the single or the few infected devices. So while Darktrace might notice that this specific infection behavior is normal for a single device, we still do peer grouping and we still analyze the whole network. So it will still stand out for the peer group and the overall network, and we're still spotting it. We had a case last year with an quote-unquote APT, where we came into a proof of value, and we saw a single laptop beacon out, making repeated connections every 12 hours to a rare IP address on the internet where nobody else went to, but this device. So it was normal for this laptop to do this every 12 hours using HTTP post requests, but nobody else did this. So we highlighted this to the customer, and a week later, the US CERT came around and said, this IP address, amongst others, is part of the Lazarus group, which the US CERT says is the North Koreans. We don't do attribution, but this is a nice case of us finding a pre-infected, APT-infected, advanced persistent threat-infected environment coming in when the environment was already infected, but still spotting it and highlighting it. One of the most subtle threats you could imagine.
Brilliant, thank you, Max. So there's another question here that says, what about encryption? Can you break encrypted traffic?
That's another good one. So we do not break up encryption. Darktrace does not do SSL certificate pinning or SSL inspection. We don't break up encryption because there's a lot of overheads. Other companies and other solutions do this really well. And we try to focus on what we can do best, and that is using artificial intelligence to detect the bad guys. Now, in our opinion, we don't need to break up encryption to identify attacks. If you think about anomalies, most of the interesting stuff happens on the metadata level. So what kind of encryption is being used? Is it SSL version 1.2.3? Is it TLS 1.2.3? Is it what cipher suites are being used? What elliptic curves are being used? And other metadata like, have these devices talked before? How often do they normally talk? What times of the day do they talk? What amount of traffic is being sent? So there's many, many dimensions of features that a human couldn't analyze, but which machine learning is really good at analyzing. So we don't break up encryption, to come back to the question, but we don't need to do it to find anomalies. So we see more and more threat actors shift towards encryption for command and control traffic. And we see a small shift in internal networks, more encryption, so less telnet, more SSH, more RDP, less SMB1, but more SMB version 3. And we firmly believe, and this coincides with my experience, having seen over 500 customer networks live, that you don't need to break up encryption to find the initial attack vector, but it can help if you do the investigation afterwards, when you want to see what specific command and control commands were sent and what particular data was being sent out.
Brilliant, thank you, Max.
Just got one question on here. It says, how many of the automated responses turn out to be false positives?
That's great. I don't have a fixed number in my head, but this is obviously the most important thing we look at when we deploy automated response, autonomous response. Because as soon as we stop business operations somewhere, nobody's going to give us another shot, right? So, and as I said, I don't have a hard number, but I want to make you understand where we come from and what we think about this problem. So there's always cases where Darktrace doesn't get it right, and I'm not going to lie and say there's 0% false positives, if you want to call it that. But the important thing is to understand where you want to use anti-GINA. So anti-GINA is something, the autonomous response, which you don't want to use everywhere in your whole estate all the time to block everything and kill it with fire. So when we deploy anti-GINA, we first use it in what we call the human confirmation mode, where anti-GINA suggests something like, Max, I would like to block this RDP connection, but I've never seen this before. Would you like me to do this? You can even use our smartphone app to do this, so it's very easy to use. And once there's enough confidence being built, and you have decided where in your estate you want to use autonomous response, you can go into full autonomous mode. So there can be a mix of human verification mode for the bits and pieces where you say, okay, it's good to know this and it's good to block this, but I don't need to do this straight away. Let's say cases of malicious administrative activity. You have an admin who uses RDP or SSH to go into places you don't want him to go, but it's not the ransomware case which is going to kill your whole environment. So you might use human confirmation mode to stop the admin, but for your laptop estate and your client estate and your workstation estate, so different place in your environment, you want to use autonomous response to defend against things like ransomware. So there's cases where there's more risk to autonomous response in your estate, where you might want to use the human confirmation mode or have Darktrace build up more confidence over more time. And there's other places in your estate where you can say the risk of Darktrace blocking something that's okay for a few minutes is not as great, but the risk of being ransomware or being hit by lateral moving malware is much bigger. The other thing is, coming back to cases where Darktrace doesn't get it right or anti-GINA doesn't get it right, it's an escalating process. So let's say anti-GINA sees something that looks bad, let's say command and control traffic and malware download, it starts to stop it. And if the bad behavior persists, so there's more command and control traffic or it escalates, it tries to scan, it will take more severe actions. But if the bad behavior doesn't persist, it might tune down its reaction. So I know I didn't give you a hard and fast answer to the ratio of good hits versus bad hits, but I hope I showed you there's a lot of subtlety to it, there's a lot of cleverness to it, and you can decide where to use autonomous response and in what flavor, basically. I hope that helps you to get a better idea of how it works.
Thanks, Max. And just one final question to probably round off the webinar. You mentioned a proof of value. How do we go about setting that up?
So you get in touch with our partners, obviously, with Bytes and ourselves. And it's a very straightforward process. Once you got in touch, we're going to set up a call with your network engineers or somebody who's knowledgeable of your network for what we call a sizing call. This normally lasts for an hour. It gives us an understanding. We're going to ask you some questions like, where's your main offices? Where's your data centers? Then together, we're going to settle in the sizing call on one of your core switches or a location where we want to conduct the proof of value. Then we're going to ship you one of our appliances according to the throughput we're seeing or we discussed in the sizing call. We're going to have a technician plug it in with you, install it with you in your data center or at your office or wherever we want to place it in your industrial control environment. We have Darktrace learn for 5 to 7 business days. And then normally in a normal process, we have 3 reports being written by one of my cyber analysts. And in these normal operations, we do what we call home, where your Darktrace appliance on site makes a reverse SSH connection to our virtual machine network and Darktrace. So we do have access to your appliance, but all the data, very importantly, stays on your appliance. The only thing that happens with the remote access is that our analyst jumps onto your Darktrace appliance over remote SSH, looks at all your alerts for a given week, and writes up a report, a threat intelligence report. Think of it as a threat hunt in your environment for a week. You get the report that says, here's a botnet, there's a malicious insider, there's a firewall misconfiguration. Very nice to digest, very easy to digest. And you get 3 of them over the course of 3 weeks. So after a month, 1 week of learning, 3 weeks of reports, you can decide, well, this looks great, I want to keep it, let's go into commercial discussions. Or you don't quite see the value and you want to have further follow-up discussions, but most prospects and customers immediately see that there's something wrong in the network. They see and like the visibility, and they like the services sometimes, which we or our partners deliver. So how do you go about it? Get in touch with anybody on the call here, and we go from there to do a sizing call.
That's great. And thanks for that, Max. So yeah, and just to repeat that, if you did want to run a free proof of value, just put that in the feedback form and we'll be able to get in touch with you guys. But I think that concludes today's webinar. As we stated at the start, the recording will be sent out to you within the next 24 hours. But thanks, Max, for your time today, and I hope everyone enjoyed the webinar.
Brilliant. Thank you very much for listening, everybody. Have a lovely day and speak to you soon. Bye then.